Jill, I guess let everybody in, and when that's done, let me know and we'll start.
There is no one in the waiting room.
Okay, we'll go ahead and start then. So thank you all for being on today. This MU Extension Forage Livestock and Town Hall meeting. My name is Patrick Davis, MU Extension Livestock Field Specialist in Southwest Missouri and Stockton, Missouri. Today, I'll be our host today, and our co-host will be Jill Scheidt. And she's actually changed her name to Ask Questions here, and we'll discuss that here in a little bit. But like I said, thank you all for being on today, and also thank you for those who are watching this live via YouTube. As one thing we do with this event, we do have it via Zoom as well as live via YouTube, and the MU IPM YouTube simulcast. They're the Integrated Pest Management YouTube channel with the University of Missouri. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but the website's there if you want to ever join this live. And also, if you go to that website, we have previous town halls recorded, and you can scroll through those and visit those as well. So as far as asking questions, and we do encourage you to ask questions, but the best way to ask questions during this event is to basically on Zoom there at the bottom, it's either at the bottom or at the top of your screen, there's a chat button. And Jill will probably put something there in the chat to encourage you to ask questions, but there's a chat button, and you click on that chat button, and in the drop down menu you can either ask the question to everybody, or you can, if you want to be anonymous in asking the question, you can go to the person who has asked questions here, and you click on that person, and when you do that, only that co-host, which today is Jill Scheidt, who's agronomy field specialist with MU Extension in the Lamar area, will see those questions, and she'll alert me to those questions. And as we go through the day, we will try to get those questions answered. So we do encourage your questions, and it really helps make the meeting better with the questions. And so please, as you have questions throughout the day, ask those questions. So as far as our agenda for today, we'll have, like we normally do during these town halls, we'll have Dr. Pat Guinan in the MU Atmospheric Sciences area, weather area talk, give us a weather report. And then later on, after that, our main presentation will be given today by Tim Schnakenberg, who is a MU Extension agronomy field specialist in the Stone County area. We'll give a presentation on making good hay in bad weather. And so with that, Dr. Guinan, who's Associate Extension Professor, Climatology, Atmospheric Sciences with MU Extension, will give us a weather report. Pat, are you ready to go?
I am. Thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll get right into it. We're about halfway through the month of April, and it's been a wet one for much of Missouri. These are the radar estimates over the past couple weeks, beginning April 1st through this morning. And you know, the southeastern half of the state, I'd say we are really wet, and especially as you go further south and east through Missouri. These are just some of the radar estimates over the past couple weeks, and the yellows are indicative of 2 or more inches. We have several areas of 3 or more inches, and even in the southeastern parts of the state, the Boot Heel is exceptionally wet, with some reports of over 5 inches so far for the first half of April, and Southeast Missouri has been exceptionally wet the entire year. Some very wet conditions, upwards of nearly 20 inches of rain so far in some of those Boot Hill counties. And we're not even through the end of April, first 4 months of the year yet. So very wet conditions, maybe a little bit drier. I put drier in quotes, but some of the north central counties right here, around Macon and Lynn and Grundy County, over into parts of Mercer and Harrison County, a little area of lighter precipitation. But for the most part, it was somewhat wet across northern Missouri during the latter half of March. So our soils are looking really good in regard to having enough moisture in them. Precipitation using CoCoRa's observer reports over the past 48 hours, ending at 7 a.m. this morning. You can see how much rain has fallen over the past couple of days. Again, it looks like the southeastern half of the state, we see some of the biggest totals, and where they don't need it, some of these areas in south central Missouri, inch and 3/4, some near 2 inches here in northwest Arkansas, but some very wet conditions with the system that moved through yesterday, bringing some more rainfall. Soil conditions across the country, for that matter. It's kind of interesting to note, it's a tale of two stories when you look at the United States. It's very dry. Across the western half of the country, we see much of the plains and parts of much of the west, where we see some very dry topsoil moisture conditions. Of course, that's due to a drought that's been ongoing there, much of the western half of the country for over a year. So, but as you move east from Minnesota to Louisiana on east, we're looking fine in regard to having a reservoir of moisture in the soil profile. Here in Missouri, only 2% of the state is reporting short to very short. So for the most part, we're looking fine. Soil temperatures, sort of reflecting here in the lower left. The red up and down nature is sort of the theme we've seen for much of the spring, with these warm periods and cool periods. Just a few days ago, we were in the 80s, upper 80s in parts of northern Missouri, and then yesterday it was snowing. And so air temperatures are reflecting what we're seeing in the soil temperatures as well, the up and down nature. The blue line is indicative of the 22-year average, where you get an idea of the climatological mean of the 2-inch soil temperature. That red right here you see at the end is the current, and that's going to be obviously taking a dip now that we're in a cool phase that's going to stick around for several days, cool weather conditions. Just from about 15 minutes ago, the lower right, these are the soil temperatures as of 11:45 a.m. this morning. Using Missouri Mesonet data, you can see they're in the 40s just prior to noon here across much of northern Missouri. Some lower to middle 50s, a little bit warmer as you go across southern sections of the state, but some cool conditions in that regard with our soil temperatures. Today's a windy one. March and April are climatologically our windiest months of the year, and we're definitely seeing it this month. We've had some very windy conditions with some of the potent systems that have moved through the state. The National Weather Service has indicated elevated fire danger today. There actually are red flag warnings in northwest Missouri for winds across much of northern Missouri, 35 to 40 miles per hour. They could even gust as high as 50 miles per hour. So that obviously can be impactful. Recommendations are not to have any fires because they can spread rapidly under those strong westerly winds that are forecast to occur later this afternoon. That's when the gustiest winds will occur, perhaps 40 to 45 miles an hour, 30 to 35 miles an hour out of the west across central and southern sections. The weekend forecast, today is a nice day at least with the sunshine. We had a lot of frost reported this morning with the cool conditions, but looks like there is another chance of some showers and thunderstorms, another system impacting the state tomorrow. Not a whole lot of precipitation in regard to accumulation, but nonetheless, we're very wet. It'd be nice to have some more dry time with warmer temperatures and sunshine. We're not really going to get that tomorrow. I think for the weekend, Saturday will be the pick day of the week. It will be cool, but nonetheless, I think we'll see mostly sunny conditions across the state. And then another system on Sunday. Sunday's going to feel raw. with some very cool temperatures, cloudy and showery. It's going to feel like March over the next several days with these cool weather conditions. We have several chilly mornings on tap. Currently here in the upper left, these were the current air temperatures as of 11:45 this morning. Again, very cool across still northern Missouri in the low to mid 40s. We've rebounded a little bit here in the 50s across the rest of the state. Highs here in the upper right indicate these are below normal temperatures. These are more typical, say, at the end of March for high temperatures, but generally in the 50s a day across northern Missouri and low to mid 60s across the rest of the state. As you can see here on the bottom for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, there's going to be some frost opportunities, especially across northern Missouri. Look at some of these low temperatures for Friday through Monday, generally in the mid 30s, low to mid 30s on some of the days. Some very cool conditions as we go through the weekend. Again, this is more typical when I look at these lows here from Friday through Monday. That's more typical of the middle part of March than say the middle part of April. So some very cool weather over the next several days that obviously will mitigate any drying opportunities as we go into early next week. This is a forecast of precipitation over the next 7 days. We really don't need any, but nonetheless, the systems for tomorrow and as well as Sunday and Monday, some more showery conditions. And then another system as we go into the middle part of later next week, mid to late next week, accumulations perhaps as much as a half inch over the next 7 days across Missouri. This is a forecast for next week, starting Tuesday through Saturday. It finally looks like we're going to perhaps see that pendulum swing again, hopefully by the middle or latter part of next week to some warmer conditions. I've noticed these above normal temperatures across much of the western, southwestern U.S. That is starting to migrate slowly eastward as we get into the middle and latter part of next week. These cooler conditions will translate eastward. So at least hopefully after we get over this cool spell over the next few days, hopefully some warmer weather as we get into the middle and latter part of next week. Here on the right is indicative of a somewhat of an enhanced likelihood of below normal precipitation. That's a good thing. We would like to get out in the field to get prepare the fields for planting as well as start planting the corn. But it does look like perhaps maybe a slightly below precipitation. But again, it's the middle part of April. We're getting into spring. May is climatologically our wettest month. So even though you see these below normal conditions for precipitation, that doesn't mean we're not going to see any rain. There obviously could be some chances of showers as we go into the middle and latter part of next week. Patrick, that's pretty much a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Pat. Jill, do you have any questions for Pat?
No questions in the chat currently.
Okay. Again, thank you, Pat, for being on and providing us with that weather report. So with that, we'll move on to the main portion of the presentation today. Tim Schnakenberg, MU Extension Agronomy Field Specialist, as I mentioned earlier, down in the Stone County area in southwest Missouri, is going to talk about making good hay in bad weather. So, Tim, floor is yours.
Thank you, Patrick. We're going to talk about hay as we're getting into mid-April. We start thinking about hay as we go into May, and as Patrick's Guinan said, we have probably our wettest month of the year is in May. And so as a result, that creates a lot of challenges for haymakers across the state of Missouri. And so these are real issues that we deal with if you're trying to cut specifically things like alfalfa and orchard grass and tall fescue, and certainly the cereal crops that were planted last fall, triticale and rye and wheat, even crimson clover. Those are challenging forage crops to get harvested on time to get the greatest both production but also quality without having to deal with the mold issues. it's really a challenging time because, in the summer months, if it's June, we could probably harvest within a day or maybe two. But when we're talking about harvesting in late April or early May, when many of these forages are needing to be harvested for quality, we end up having trouble, and it may take us 4 to 5 days potentially, and that just doesn't happen from a climate standpoint. We don't always get that, and so it's a real challenge, and it becomes a dilemma for haymakers across the state of Missouri. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. One of our biggest fears is harvesting it too early and then dealing with mold issues. We have mold that can form within the bale, whether it's wrapped baleage or if it's supposedly dry hay. If the temperature and moisture and everything is not right, we can end up with a mold problem. There are at least 10 main genera of fungi that can be found in that windrow, and they're all sitting there just waiting for the perfect conditions. A lot of people want to test for mold, and we can test through our vet diagnostic lab on campus. We can test for molds in hay and do a mycotoxin screening, but we don't always find that really gives us, clues for managing the mold. The propagation of mold normally occurs at temperatures somewhere between 20 and 30% moisture, depending upon the type of bale that we're making. That's when we have the most issue. That's when we sometimes run into problems with mold, just overtaking the hay throughout. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. And if we do get mold in hay, the performance of animal, it's not always that it will be deadly or kill the animal. Although horses and lactating dairy cows and pregnant cattle are probably the most susceptible, but it's generally a problem with refusal, whether it's taste or the dustiness, the lower feed quality. We just don't get the intake. And that's probably our biggest issue with moldy hay, particularly in the livestock industry. I was looking for some data and some studies that were done regarding mold, and I found a couple. University of Manitoba did a study where they were looking at the intake of dairy heifers. It dropped their intake by 40% due to the fungal biomass levels. University of Tennessee actually has come out and said that they suggest that you severely limit molded hay to cattle to no more than 30% of the total ration, if that's what you've got. Sometimes that can be done, and in other cases, it isn't, because we've got too much hay that's moldy. So really, the safe recommendations for baling will vary depending upon whether it's small square bales or large square bales or round bales. You're probably safer with the small square bales at upwards to 22%, especially how they're stacked and how they're handled immediately after baling. But in most cases with the large round bales, we want to shoot for about 18% moisture. And if we're doing large squares, they're a lot more compact. There's less opportunity for air to get around there to dry them out. 16% moisture is really what we're after if you're doing large squares. And certainly there is equipment available for testing, whether it's a moisture meter or something as simple as a gram scale and a microwave. That's probably just about as accurate as anything we have. Now, the problem we run into with hay in Missouri, especially if we're baling fescue or orchard grass, sometimes it can get so mature on us that you can almost just harvest it for seed production first. And that's really too late to get the full nutritional value out of it. I talked to a commercial hay producer several years ago, and he made the comment one time. He said, well, I'd normally just try to wait until about mid-June. I get more hay that way, and I don't have to worry about the rain. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to buy hay from you, because That's in reality what a lot of people do in order to harvest fescue hay and get the tonnage and not have to worry about the rains. And it just, the payback is not as good because we are having to deal with supplemental feeds, or our nutrition is not where it should be, and we lose condition on our cattle over the winter. So really, the challenge is that harvesting our cool season forages, it just rarely matches up with the climate in Missouri. And often there is a low return on investment for the amount of equipment, the fertilizer, your time, your land resources. We don't always get the return on investment that we'd like to have. And so, that's what our goal is to look at some things that we can do to maybe offset this problem that we have every year in the month of May. Also, I think we need to also consider that just because we get a lot of hay bales, that doesn't necessarily mean we had a successful hay crop. If we're harvesting starting in late May, going into June, and even certainly as late as July, which a lot of first cutting fescue doesn't always get harvested until then. And this can apply to brome in the northern part of the state. If it's too late, we may get the tonnage, but we don't always have the energy that our cows need to get through the winter. We're not making sure they have the groceries in order to take care of their nutritional needs. So it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma that we face every year where we're trying to decide, okay, do I go ahead and cut hay and take the risk? Maybe I need 4 or 5 days to really get it dry. What do I do? And so we're always balancing that out, quality versus quantity sometimes. So I'm thinking that it is maybe time on some of our farms in Missouri to consider a paradigm change. Of course, a paradigm defined as a framework containing basic assumptions, ways of thinking, and methodology that are commonly accepted. Is it time for us to kind of change our thinking and maybe take a different approach instead of having the same problem year after year? I'm not saying we're going to get rid of all of our issues, but I do think that there are some things that we can consider to make the most of trying to make good hay in bad weather. So there's six points I want to make real quick today. And number one is go ahead and prepare for an early harvest. A lot of times we don't always get our equipment lined up. We don't get it greased and out of the shed and ready to go. And then a window of opportunity rolls in and we're not there. We're not ready yet. Or we just think, I'm not going to take the risk. Sometimes risks are worth taking. Kind of depends on the forage that we're dealing with. But preparing for an early harvest is something to shoot for. And I'm talking some years, that early harvest on some of the grasses that we may be growing may actually be as early as late April. That's pretty early. But there have been situations where there were windows of opportunity, 4 days, maybe 5, where we could get in there and get at least started. We're not going to get all of our hay harvested, but we can at least get started. And I think we'll find that if you do skip the rain, you can have great yielding, well, moderate yielding, I should say, but higher quality first cutting forage. And one of the good things about this approach is that at least we get the season started. And it's not just about the first cutting, it's also about that second cutting, because many of our hay fields or grass hay fields, we don't get around to getting a second cutting of any size. But if we can start early, who knows, maybe 40, 45 days later, we can come in and take a second cutting that's going to be excellent quality. And so the quality of both of those cuttings combined actually makes up for, and the tonnage might actually make up for itself. So to me, I think early harvest, when we have the opportunity to have it, is well worth it. So, everybody's worried about rained on hay, and it is a viable concern, believe me. because it's almost like every 2 or 3 days we're getting a shower or something in the month of May. And, it is a concern. And we do find that, forage quality is better retained if, the rain is occurring soon after cutting, when the forage has little time to dry. It's still moisture. There's still some moisture in it. We can actually, have very little impact on that hay. In a study in Wisconsin that I found, they found the maximum loss in dry matter, which was significant at 54%, occurred when there was 2.5 inches of rain that fell on nearly dry hay. That's when they had the greatest loss. Probably it was alfalfa. And that's what we find. If we're getting ready to rake it for the last time, or we're getting ready to bale and it's that close, and then we get a rain on it, that can be disastrous. Also, forage quality is retained if there's a single short event. The problem you run into is if you get that rain on your hay and then it starts raining and where a cell has set in and we're there for the next 2 weeks, that's a problem. That's not a good situation. Forage intensity is higher versus a longer, lower intensity event. And also if it's re-wetted many times, that's when we get into trouble. And this happens. It happens to a lot of people. Most of the effect of forage quality on rain on hay is going to occur if there's leaf loss, particularly with legumes. But, they found in some of the University of Wisconsin research that digestibility of rain on hay can decline as much as 6 to 40%, as a result of soluble carbohydrates that are leached and the fibers start to make a higher percentage of that dry matter. We have reduced carbohydrate content, so we have less energy. And then, of course, they found that the microbe activity is thought to concentrate fiber content in our forage that gets rained on. And that, fiber just isn't made during the wetting process, but it's the microbe activity that's concentrating that fiber content. So I wanted to give you a little background on rained on hay and what you can expect. Now, I found this data very interesting out of the University of Arkansas, looking at Bermudagrass. They were comparing a 3-inch rain on 13% dry matter Bermudagrass, which is pretty dry. It's ready to be baled for sure. And they actually found that the fiber content, NDF and ADF both went up about 1.5 to 2%. TDN only dropped 1.5 points, which is not much. And Bermuda's kind of good about this if it gets rained on. But a 2-week delay in harvest, it dropped 6.5 points. And then a 4-week delay in harvest, 15 points. So delaying was a much bigger concern than getting a little rain on it, even on dry forage. And this is a grass here. Now on alfalfa, this is another study that was looking specifically at standing alfalfa digestibility at 70%, at 1/10 bloom when it's time to harvest at 67%. So still pretty good, great feed. If it was rained on, it had dropped 10 points. But if it took them 3 weeks and they didn't want to take any chances and they were delayed 3 weeks, that TDN digestibility actually dropped down to 52. So, sometimes it's worth taking those risks. Have to use some good common sense and really keep an eye on the forecast, but sometimes it can be done. Number 2, this is kind of a radical idea, and I don't know too many people that do it, but grazing your hay fields late. We're talking about keeping the cows on and letting them graze as early as March and early April. And then continue cutting as we get into June. Get off of it, let it come on, and you've delayed that growth. What this does is it pushes the vegetative growth into a drier season. And so you're able to find a drier season to get some of these cool season grass forages harvested. There is probably I'm sure there's going to be a yield loss as a result of this compared to what you would get. But I think the potential for making quality feed is there. And I can probably tell you, I can point you to one or two people that I know of that have actually done this. It's not something that's commonly done. It's a little radical, but I do think that sometimes we get in a hurry and we want to get our hay harvest started, but yet, and we throw a lot of fertility at it, and then it's all ready to go. And the next thing we know, it's raining on May 15th. And so this is one approach to kind of slow that process down and go ahead and get some grazing ability on it or capability on it, and then allow it to kind of take off as we get into May and June. And then our season is a lot better at that point. So something just to consider. A third approach to making good hay in bad weather would be to convert some of our operation to a wrapped baleage. And this kind of depends upon the scale of your operation, whether or not you can justify it. I know that we have several custom operators that do this across the state. And that certainly has allowed some folks to be able to take advantage of this. But it's a timing issue too. So it's really difficult to get everybody there at the right time. But the thing about baleage is that we're trying to get feed wrapped up and put in a storage, into storage in a very short amount of time. And the forecasts today are so much better than they used to be. I think the statistics will show you that, accuracy of a forecast within 1 or 2 days is so much better than 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days later. So it helps us to be able to make a sounder decision about when to harvest or when to start cutting hay. And if we can get it up by tomorrow or maybe the next day, we have a lot better information to work with. So, essentially you can get in and out of the hay field in less than 24 hours. We don't get that choice with dry hay production. And so this has created a much greater situation for getting first harvests out, first cuttings of alfalfa, getting wrapped baleage made of rye and triticale and those types of crops. The great thing about it is it helps to replace the capital costs of the hay barn. It's a lot cheaper than the conventional haylage or silage systems that we've had in the past. We have much lower harvest losses and we have higher quality feed, but we have to remember this does not enhance quality, but it preserves feed quality. That's important to understand. It preserves it compared, at drying it down to 45 to 60% moisture. We're actually not having to worry about getting it down to 18% or 20%, where we can have greater opportunity for losses. Number 4, speeding up harvest. And these are kind of fundamental ways that we take care of trying to get hay drying down as quick as possible. Most people are implementing these already. Certainly mechanically conditioning hay, especially for legumes or for large stemmed grass crops like sedan grass or millets. Certainly the conditioning that hay will help to break that cuticle down in that waxy layer. Also using wide swaths to maximize the solar drying capacity is very important to get it to dry as evenly and use the solar effect of the sun to speed up the process versus the picture on the right, where it is already kind of clumped and sun exposure is just not happening. That might work fine if you're trying to wilt it for a baleage, but it doesn't work for dry hay production. Certainly a tedder has revolutionized the drying process. Certainly it's important in many cases with grass hay. We generally try to keep these out of legume hay fields. These are probably going to lead to a lot more loss of leaf, but certainly it has helped us a lot in the grass hay drying business. And then we don't have as many people that take advantage of this, but you can use preservatives, propionic acid, or some other buffered acids, ammonium propionate, or one of these others that can be used to actually get started baling a little earlier than normal and kind of get it going. And it will, as it sprayed on in the windrow, it'll actually cause the bacteria to work a little faster and take care of some of that moisture for you in the bale. So that's certainly an option as well. Number 5, another option for dealing with, bad weather and trying to get as much good hay harvested is to convert more to our warm season forages. And as thinking about warm season forages across the state of Missouri, I think these are the ones that kind of come to my mind. The native grasses such as switchgrass, big blue stem, Indian grass. These probably fit as good as anything for native. And then of course the introduced species in South Missouri. There may be options for Bermudagrass, for crabgrass throughout the state. And in some cases, we've seen some Caucasian blue stem being used. And so these are pretty much probably our best options for warm season grasses. And this allows us to harvest in a drier time of the year, and we don't have to watch the weather quite as close. And they do a pretty good job of maintaining quality very well if harvested without concern for the weather. Just wanted to show a couple of examples about changing that paradigm. Some folks that have already done that. Here's a gentleman, Mr. McKee out of Ozark County that Sarah Kenyon, my cohort has worked with. And he switched over to big blue stem from Bermuda grass. And he'll tell you he's gotten more production. He's had less fertilizer needs on this native grass. And so he's all in now on these native grasses. And you can see some of the quality that he's getting out of that grass as far as meeting a lot of the nutritional needs. And here's another one, Gene Coward in Berry County, who has changed the paradigm. He's gone more the big blue stem and Indian grass route. He's got close to 55 acres of this now, and he's pretty happy with it. He planted stands 3 times in a row, and his big thing about it is I just don't have to put as much fertility as I have had on the Bermuda grass and other forages. It's just a more efficient user of the fertility. It takes some nutrient out of the ground, but it's just more efficient. And so these are a couple of examples where this has worked. So I think, talking about a paradigm adjustment, this changed approach, if you want to go more with the warm season grasses for hay, use that fescue and the other cool season grasses during the fall and the spring and graze that. And if you have an opportunity, a window, go for it in the spring for hay. But if you don't have the window, you're not as at a loss as much if you've got several acres already dedicated to hay production that are warm season grasses. And those can also be used for grazing as well in the summer. Kind of gets us off that hot endophyte fescue and gives us some other options. Lastly, I think another approach to dealing with this issue, this dilemma that we deal with in Missouri every year, is just sell the equipment, get out of the hay business, free up a lot of your time, and don't have the investment of the machinery and the fertilizer expense that's so expensive this year, and start buying your hay. That's certainly a way to deal with this. And economically, it makes a lot of sense. I realize that hay availability may be a challenge this year. And it's always a challenge sometimes finding a good source that you can consistently depend upon. But if you can find that source, there's been a few folks that have realized they don't miss the hay business at all. They'd rather just buy that hay, concentrate on the cows that actually make the money, not the hay, but the cows that make the money, and try to, turn a lot of that hay ground into grazing ground and actually be able to utilize their fertility much and their ground more efficiently. And I bring that up here is because I've been trying to track the nutrient value in a 4x5, 900-pound fescue bale in the last year and a half. And this is what I found. Calling one of our local fertilizer dealers, I've tracked the price of fertilizer in the last year and a half. And when I first called him about a year and a half ago, November of 2020, when you add up the nutrient value in that hay bale, it was about $10 in that one bale. It jumped last year, and then it continued to jump from September to December. And then I called again yesterday and got prices, and I assigned those prices to the nutrient removal of a 900-pound fescue bale, and we're up to $25 now. So it's gone just in a short time. It has multiplied 2.5 times. And so that is an issue for making hay. And it's also an issue when you're taking hay off of a hay field and not replenishing it with manure. And so there are a few folks this year that are realizing that instead of buying fertilizer, they're going to buy it through hay bales, and they're going to bring it back to their farms and feed that hay from somebody else's farm onto their fields and and take care of the fertility that way, depending upon how they feed that hay. That's very important. How they graze, that all brings it back to those fields. And so, this changes the paradigm a little bit when you start realizing that, hay is really a mining operation. And if we don't replenish that, we're going to have lower quality fields. As far as the stands are not going to be as good, weeds are going to be a bigger issue, and we can get behind really fast, particularly in the potassium side. I've seen that many, many times. Potassium is a real remover. I'm using the figure of 47 pounds of potash removed for every ton of hay taken off the field, and that starts adding up. So that's really what I have, and just wanted to get some thoughts out there as we go into this year's hay season. So that's pretty much my presentation, Patrick, at this point.
Thank you, Tim. Jill, is there any questions?
Patrick, there's no questions currently in the chat, but in our emails prior to this, someone had asked if there were suggestions for varieties of forages that would be best for haymaking.
Well, I'll address that. Yeah, I'll address that. I mean, that really kind of depends upon the class of livestock that we're feeding. It depends upon the availability of some of these forages. But, mostly particularly in the south of I-70, we're seeing a lot of tall fescue that's used for hay. That's consistent across this area. We also have some more brome that's used in the north part of the state, and orchard grass is used statewide. So as far as cool season grasses, those are our primary feeds that we use. We also have the legumes such as clover. Red clover works very well. Alfalfa works very well. And then, of course, I listed the warm season grasses that are there. Specifically, the native grasses work excellent. You just have to treat them a little differently. You certainly want to cut those higher. You don't want to abuse those stands. But then you know, the old world blue stems and the and crabgrass work very well, as well as Bermuda grass, pretty much south of I-70.
Any other questions?
Don't see any questions currently in the chat.
Okay. Again, thank you, Tim, for being on today, and we're gonna kind of wrap up here. Actually, and if you can see this, this kind of goes along, and Tim's actually going to be a part of this this hay school, but this kind of goes along with the presentation today, and in the Springfield area, actually at the Brookline Church of Christ on April 26th. We're going to have a regional hay school. MU Extension's doing a regional hay school, in addition with sponsors, Crown Power Equipment and Vermeer. As you can see from the flyer here, we're going to talk about forage quality, hay production, cattle nutrition, hay fertility and management, understanding a hay test, and then various harvest systems, storage systems, hay feeding efficiency, and then pest management and just management of cost of hay in general. And so costs on that's $25 per person. And if you have a couple from the same farming operation, it would be $40 per couple. And if you have any questions or want to register for that, you can always contact the Greene County Extension Center at 417-881-8909. So with that, just thought we'd mention that since it kind of goes along with the talk today. As we wrap up this presentation, as well as others that we've done in the past with the Forage Livestock Town Halls, they're on the MU IPM YouTube website. And if you want to watch, I'll get to our future town halls here in the next slide. But if you want to watch future town halls live or previous town halls, just go to that MU IPM YouTube page and you can view those. As far as upcoming town hall meetings, we're going to have another one this month on April 28th. And Pat Miller, who's an MU Extension Agronomy Field Specialist in the Nevada, Missouri area, Vernon County area, is going to talk about alfalfa insects and pest issues. And so, again, it will be at noon on April 28th. And it'll be online either through YouTube Live or Zoom. And as we progress through the rest of the spring and through the summer, we will have town halls on the second and fourth Thursdays from May through August. And so we will be putting that information out as far as what will be covered in those town halls as we get it. So with that, I want to thank you all for being on. Again, you can see the town halls via YouTube Live through the IPM MU Integrated Pest Management YouTube page, or you can register for the future town halls at ipm.missouri.edu town halls. And also, if you ever have any questions, you can register and submit those questions at that website. So with that, again, I want to thank you all for being on today, and hope to see you at the future town hall.